just this a little bit. Good evening, everybody. You are here for First Thursday at the Cowlitz County Historical Museum to see a program by our legendary curator, Bill Watson, on some of the photos that we have in our archives. And before we get started with Bill, I will start with a couple of announcements. This is our last First Thursday of this year, so we're kind of in mid-season for First Thursdays. Our next First Thursday actually won't be a First Thursday, it'll be a staff picks program, which is what we would do for First Thursday in January, where we choose the objects that we like the most that came in during the previous year of donations. But we're going to do it on a Saturday during the opening of a new exhibit in our temporary exhibit gallery, and we'll keep you posted on that. But that will happen on a Saturday during the daytime, so you don't have to drive over here at nighttime in the winter. It'll be daylight when you arrive and daylight when you leave. So it'll make it a little bit easier to get to our staff picks program with our opening for a new exhibit in early January, and we'll keep you posted on that. But upcoming though in December, we do have on December 8th, which is Sunday, our Winter Festival program, and Danielle Robbins runs that, and that'll go from noon to 4 o'clock on Sunday the 8th. And so we look forward to seeing all of you there that can make it, and some of you may have even heard from Danielle as far as needs for any volunteers. Let's see, what else do we have here? And next year, actually even further out, I just talked with the Columbia Artist Association. Their spring art show is going to come back again. This will be, I believe, the 4th year we will have partnered with them, and that's going to be in March. So plenty of time to keep plugging that one. But that just got finalized the other day when Eileen Thompson from the Columbia Artist Association walked in, and we had a nice little conversation. And I figured we were going to start talking about the partnership again, which it's all local artists and the art's for sale. It benefits the museum and it benefits the Artist Association. Also want to recognize Bob Chase and Ted Gruber, who are 2 of our board members, and they have to be sitting right almost next to each other, one separated by 1 seat. And some of you may remember Ted from his program on postal history of Cowlitz County, Washington. I always have to remember to add Washington in there. And so his book is available at the gift shop if you're inclined to purchase it, if you didn't have a chance to purchase it yet. And then finally, I'm going to go ahead and welcome our speaker here, Bill Watson, who really doesn't need much of an introduction because so many of you know him, call the museum asking for him, email asking for him, walk in asking for him, because he's the man that has all the answers to the questions that you have. He's the man that can find any random file or artifact that if it exists, if we have it, he can find it. And Bill is local from here. He grew up outside of Kelso. He went to Kelso High School, Lower Columbia College, and then got a degree in anthropology from Washington State University. And he started off here as a volunteer back in 2003. So his first relationship here in an official capacity was as a volunteer 21 years ago. He was hired on board as curator in 2007. And then in 2017, he joined the Cowlitz County Historical Preservation Commission and serves as an ex officio member there. And I'm going to just turn it over to Bill because I think you don't want to hear me talk anymore. You want to hear Bill talk. You want to see the really cool pictures that he has. So anyway, let's give Bill a very warm welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me just get this going. Okay. There we go. Okay, welcome everyone. As Joseph said, I've been going through and having museum's collections for 21 years now. And in fact, the very first large collection, which I cataloged, was a photographic collection that of Kelso photographer Hugh Ingram. And ever since, I've been fascinated by the amazing images captured of this area's history. A picture really is worth 1,000 words. And we've had several photography presentations before. In 2006, I did a program on Hugh Ingram and his photos. And just a few years ago in 2020, there was a presentation given about local photographer Jan Fardell. An entire presentation could still probably be done about early long view images, the early long view images of John B. Wilson. Tonight, however, I'd like to introduce you to some of the area's earliest photographers, whether their time here was long or brief. In this first part, I'll go over those who made a living out of photography, at least for a time. For Castle Rock, there is John D. Arthur, Eugene Strait, and Charles W. Embody. Why is that? Oh, shoot. Can I, hold on. Is there a way I can get this up? Ah. Okay, that should, okay, thank you. Sorry about that. And for Kelso, there is Arthur G. Churchley, John R. Hargrave, and Albert U. Springer. For Woodland, there is Thomas Stratton, J. A. Miser, and as a kind of honorable mention, there is James B. Cawthon and John Fletcher Ford. Now, oddly enough, although Klamath was the county seat during this period, I have yet to come across any early photos attributed to a professional studio photographer in Klamath. And so if anyone knows of any, please let me know after the program. Let's start with John D. Arthur of Castle Rock. Here are 3 of his imprints from the edges of his printed photos. These identifiers are called imprints, whether they were printed or embossed on the cardstock, which photographers sold photos on. So you can kind of see Arthur photo right there. Yeah. Now, John D. Arthur was born in 1848 in Ontario, Canada, of Scottish parents. And he married Lola Allen, and still also in Ontario in 1881. They ended up having 1 son, Percy, in 1885. And they came to the US in 1888. And in the 1900, 1910, and 1920 censuses, he's listed as a photographer in Castle Rock. And he died in Portland in 1924. And he's one of the few that I was unable to find a portrait of. So this is an unidentified mother and children that he took in Castle Rock. We have at least 28 examples of his photos in the museum. Almost all of them are portraits, and the only 2 non-portrait ones happen to be photos of splash dams. And I believe both of these are on Arkansas Creek, although I could be mistaken about this one. This one's definitely on Arkansas Creek, outside Castle Rock. And here are some imprints for Embody and Strait, whose partnership was likely in the early to mid 1890s. I'm not quite sure on the exact dates. And there's also some solo ones for Strait over here. And there's also a few photos of Strait having a partnership with a man named Mallory, who I have not fully identified yet. And Strait is, let's see, yeah. Eugene Strait was born in Missouri in 1860 to Eli and Mary Strait. and his family moved to Lewis River in 1889. And I don't know exactly when he was in the photography business, because in the censuses, he was only ever listed as a farmer. And he never married, and he died in Arizona in 1937, but was still buried in the cemetery in Ariel, Lone Pine Cemetery. And he's another one that I couldn't find a photo of, but we do have a photo of his father, Eli. And here's Charles W. Embody, who was born in Iowa in 1860 and moved to the Northwest after his marriage in Michigan in 1887. And Embody also partnered with J.F. Ford, who we'll meet later, in the center in the late 1890s. And he's listed as a photographer in Portland in the 1900 census, but later in 1906, he became a timberland broker. And he died in Portland in 1943. We have at least 15 examples of Embody and straight photos in the museum's collection. And he's best known for they are best known for their photos of the Young Brothers logging camp. And this one, probably a lot of you have seen, is the Robin and Sons Mill in Castle Rock. And that's an Embody and straight photo. And we have at least 13 examples of Eugene Straight's solo photos in the museum's collection, and plus 2 in partnership with Mallory. And he's probably best known for his portraiture and this photo of a Castle Rock pioneer reunion. And if this looks familiar, it's because we have this blown up out in the main exhibit. And here are the imprints we have for one of our most prolific early photographers, Arthur Churchman. You can see that there are a lot of different ones that he used, mostly Kelso, but we also have a few of his from Portland. And he's one of the ones that also did full, on his cardstock, he had full prints, full advertisement prints on the back of some of his photos, as you can see over there. And here's John Hargrave, who also had many different kinds of imprints. And here they are when they formed a partnership. And for Churchley, he was born in Staffordshire, England in 1869 and immigrated to the United States in 1884. He formed a partnership with Hargrave probably sometime in the early 1890s in Kelso. And I believe that partnership was dissolved by 1896 when he married Mabel Smith, the daughter of Cowlitz River Steamboat Captain Nathaniel R. Smith. And he moved his family and business to Portland in 1898 and continued as a photographer there until his death in 1927. Hargrave, seen here in his band uniform, taken by his friend Churchley, was born in Illinois in 1864, and he came to Kelso around 1890 with many other family members, several of whom were school teachers. Mm-hmm. And again, partnership with Churchley. And he also married in 1896 to Alberta Frances Burden, commonly known as Bertie. And he moved away in 1903 or 4 to Malibu, California, where he continued his photography business. But then by 1920, he moved back to the Northwest, this time to Hillsboro. And from there, he retired from photography and just listed himself as a laborer in the 1920 census. And he died there in 1944. Now, in the museum's collection for these two, we have at least 153 Churchley solo photos, 87 Hargrave solo photos, 41 partnership photos. And there's one that is imprinted with Hargrave and Burden, which, if you remember from the timeline, was the maiden name of his wife. So probably taken just before they got married. And both are well known for their portraiture in the studio. Here we see Kelso businessman P.J. Knapp. And here's Rose Valley pioneers William and Sarah Huntington. And in larger groups outside is the Kelso school group outside the Columbia Street School. Probably taken around 1893. The school itself was built in 1892. And this one is just a little girl's birthday party for Miss Maggie Arquette. And both documented the 1894 Columbia River flood in Kelso and Catlin. And these two are Churchley photos. That's just a Kelso business street. Here's looking south from Academy Street. So just, let's see, just up there, looking that way. And this one is over in Catlin at First and Main. And if you take a look, you can see this is where I got the opening slide. Let's just zoom in. There's a photographer right there. That's Mr. Hargrave taking a photo. And it's imprinted on Hargrave's stock, but I suspect that it was Mr. Churchley that took this photo of his friend taking a photo. And both occasionally went out of town for jobs. This Hargrave photo is of B.F. Brock's camp out in Eufaula. And here's a group of hop pickers somewhere in the county. There were lots of hop fields at that time, including trips to Kalama. And here's a Churchley photo of First Street, the businesses along there. And here's a 1903 Hargrave photo of Teddy Roosevelt on a whistle stop tour through the West when we stopped in Kalama. A few key differences. Churchley seemed to do many more studio portraits than Hargrave, and Hargrave seemed to do more outdoor photography. And Hargrave also stayed in Kelso 5 years longer than Churchley, although Churchley did occasionally make trips back up here from Portland after all his wife's family was up here. Let's see. And after Hargrave, as Hargrave was leaving, arrived Albert Uriah Springer. Here are some of his imprints. I know on this one, the U kind of looks like a W, but that was just the cursive style that he used. Springer was born in Illinois in 1885, but his family moved to Kelso when he was just 4 years old, around 1889. And he was pretty young when he started his photography business in 1903. And it was also around that same time, maybe just a little later, that he joined the Kelso Volunteer Firefighters. And that's where I found this photo of him. I took a larger photo of a group of firefighters. And that's why he's wearing a fireman's hat. And he continued as a photographer here in Kelso into the early 1920s when he moved his family to Mount Vernon. And it was in Mount Vernon that he died in 1945, but he's buried here in Kelso with other family members. And we have at least 20 examples of Springer's photos in the museum's collection. And some fun facts. There was an ad for Springer's studio in the very first edition of the Kelsonian in 1906. And he's also the first one of this group that we have an identified image of their studio. So there's Kelso Art Gallery photographs and his name. It was on Oak Street. Uh, And in addition to portraiture, Springer is best known for his Mountain Timber Company rail line construction photos outside Kalama in 1910. Here they are building a trestle over the Kalama River. And here's some of the rail line coming into Kalama to the mill just north of Kalama. And he's also known for the fire which destroyed his shop and photo stock on May 4th, 1911. Sorry, that's covering that up. An interesting note is that most of the photo prints of this fire have a date of 1918 written on them. And it wasn't until just a few years ago that I was going through the 1911 Cowlitz and looking for something else entirely that I found a full column article on this. And I've since had to go through our system and change all the dates from 1918 to 1911. Now for the first of the woodland photographers, Thomas Stratton. Whoop, come on. Hey, what's going on? What's going on? Come on. There we go. Sorry. Let's see. Now, Stratton, in addition to taking photographs, also had a drugstore, as you can see by photographs and drugs. And here's an ad for him in the Woodland Echo newspaper from, I think that's 1908 or something. Anyway, Thomas Stratton was actually the only one of this group who was actually born here. His parents came out west from Ohio in 1866, and he was born on the Lewis River in 1869. And he started his drugstore in Woodland in the late 1890s. And in the 1900 census, he lists his occupation as photographer, but thereafter he's only listed as a druggist. And he continued with his drugstore until at least 1838, might be a little later. And he died in Snohomish County in 1951, but is buried in the Frank Abel Cemetery in Woodland. Let's see. And I have at least 11 of his photos in the museum's collection. And he's best known for his photos of the railroad extension south of Kalama in 1901, and the only known photo we have of the town of Kearns. And Kearns was on the Lewis River, just upriver from Woodland, close to the current northeastern city limits. I don't know if Ted mentioned Kearns in his program.
We did. It's, if you know where the traffic circle is coming up highway, I think it's 503 going up toward Cougar.
Mm-hmm.
From that traffic circle, immediately southeast on the river is where it was.
Yeah, very good. Thank you, Ted. Here are some imprints of Jesse A. Miser, both in Woodland and the center. Miser was born in Indiana in 1869 and moved out west around 1890 to initially as a dairyman on Sauvie Island. And he married Ruth Badger in Kalama in 1893 and began his photography business in Woodland around 1897-98. But by 1900 had moved his business to Lecenter, and by 1903 to Vancouver. Then in 1904, he moved his family and business to California, where he would spend the rest of his life and career, passing away there in 1939. We have about 112 photos of Jesse Miser, and all but 2 of those are portraits. And the majority of those are in an album known as the Lewis River Pioneer Portrait Album. And when the program's over and the lights come up, I actually have it over in a case over there if you want to go take a look at it. There's I think around 100 pioneer photos, portraits in that album, and they're fantastic. And he also took portraits of Lewis River Indians, like Indian Zach here. Now for a few that bounced around the Northwest a little more, here's James B. Coffin. Coffin was born in Tennessee in 1854 and came to Oregon from Iowa in 1880. He was listed as a photographer in the Portland City Directory in 1888 and 9. And I believe he briefly had a studio in Kelso in 1890 before moving to Spokane. And I do believe that was very brief, and I'll tell you why in a moment. And if he photographed in Spokane and Palouse until 1901, when he moved to Puget Sound. And then he retired from his Seattle photo studio in 1915 to a farm in Port Madison in Kitsap County, where he later died in 1930. And we have 18 photos of his in the museum's collection. And most of those are under the Portland imprint, but they're of B.F. Brock's logging operations in Eufaula in the summer of 1889. And if that little locomotive you see here, and also right there, that little locomotive is the Ant, the first logging locomotive in Washington. And we have pieces of it out in the main exhibit. Now, interestingly, of the 4 Coffin Kelso imprints we have, all are portraits of members of the same family. From left to right, we have Mrs. Mary Harvey, her husband H.H. Harvey, their son Claude, their daughter Sue, who was later Mrs. Charles Harvey, and their daughter Nellie Harvey, who was later Mrs. John Hoggett. So because we only have 4 imprints and they're all of the same family, I'm pretty sure his time in Kelso was very brief. And next we have John Fletcher Ford, not necessarily in Cowlitz County, but he took photos all over the lower Columbia. As you can see, he was in La Center, St. Helens, Rainier, Portland, and Ilwaco. And he was born in Minnesota in 1860 and became an evangelist in his youth. And he was married in Iowa in 1882. They moved west around 1890. And in 1893, he conducted a revival in Ilwaco, which led to the founding of their Methodist church. And it was around 1897 that he took photography. And he, like I said, bounced around the lower Columbia region, photographing logging and fishing scenes. Little fun fact, in 1904, he accompanied the Portland Mazamas on a trip to climb Mount Shasta. And he died and was buried in Ilwaco in 1914. We have at least 34 examples of Ford's photos in the museum's collection. He's best known, at least in our collection, for his logging scenes on the lower Columbia. And only a couple are in Cowlitz County. There's quite a bit on Grays River, west of here, but a couple of the Cowlitz County ones are the Eastern and Western Logging Company, crew near Estella, and also the Mosquito and Coal Creek Railroad crossing Coal Creek. Let's see. For the second part of this program, I'd just like to highlight 4 photographers who either did some professional work here, although it wasn't their main income source, or for whom we have a large collection of their images. They are Milton Town of Carroll's, W.M. Teasley of Woodland, Wilfred Craik of Lewis River, and Woolley Peterson of Cougar. Milton Town was born in Wisconsin in 1866. He became a professional photographer in 1890, same year he married in Minnesota. And in 1900, he moved his family west to join several siblings in Pasadena, California. But only 7 years later, due to illness, he gave up professional photography and moved his family up here to a farm out at Carroll's. And he continued taking photographs kind of for fun and just small jobs. And after 1923, he even found work retouching photos in the studio of John Wilson in Longview. And he died in April 1929. We have 38 examples of Towns photos in the museum's collection, mostly of activity on their farm at Carroll's. And one of his descendants wrote a small book about his life and career, which we have in our museum library, and which was excerpted for a quarterly issue in 2002. And if you'd like, you can get a copy on your way out if you'd like to learn more about it. And William M. Teasley was born in Missouri in 1879. He did house painting with his brothers in St. Louis before moving out here around 1903. And he married Maud Dixon in Castle Rock in 1905. And in the 1910 census, they were living in Woodland, and his occupation was listed as barber. But by 1920, they moved to Portland, where he was a chiropractic doctor. And he died there in Portland in 1946. And this is the only imprint we have for Teasley, although we have his name written on several postcards. And we only have 5 examples of his photos in the collection, but 4 are postcards dating between 1909 and 1912. He likely had a pretty short photographic career, as evidenced by the small amount that we have. Let's see. You might recognize the name Wilfred Craig. He was born in Minnesota in 1887. His father died tragically when he was young, so he and his mother came west. And in the early 1900s, they moved to a small community near Battleground, where Wilfred constructed a small sawmill to support himself and his mother. He married in 1907, after which he set up a photographic business in Woodland. And later in his life, he made a career of sawmilling. And he died in 1971. The reason you might recognize his name is because several of his photos used to hang in this very room. In 2003, we got a large collection of his glass plate negatives, and we had, probably 25 or 30 printed up into large photos that used to line these walls for probably 4 or 5 years, at least, maybe longer. I know we started taking them down when we started doing the art show regularly every year. And then there's Ole Peterson. He was born in Iowa in 1867. And when in the financial panic of 1892, he lost his horse farm in Iowa, he blamed President Grover Cleveland and the Democrats. And he moved west within the next year and took up a farmstead on the North Fork of the Lewis River and vowed never to come out of the woods. He took up photography probably in the early 1900s and mainly photographed people who stopped by his ranch and many people in landscapes along the upper North Fork in Cowlitz, Clark, and Skamania counties. And he died from the effects of a fire in 1953. Now, Ole Peterson could be the subject of his own presentation, but if you'd like to learn more about him, you can request a reprinted copy of Volume 3, Number 3 of the Quarterly. Oh, we have about 200 of Ole's photos in the museum's collection, and a lot of them are portraits, but some of them are posed photos with kind of a dark sense of humor. Here you see Jacob Polly holding an axe over Fred Schroeder, who was a Woodland mayor and also a Cowlitz County commissioner. What about other photographers? Well, we have 2 imprints from a Nelson of Kelso, likely from the late 1880s. And I haven't figured out who this Nelson is quite yet. There were several in the area, so I'm not quite sure who that was. And the 1900 census lists photographers Arthur Hargrave and a German-born man named Orjane Mays, age 36, in Kalama. And we don't have any photographs attributed to Mays. And the 1910 census lists Arthur Springer, a woman named Ethel Brainerd in Rose Valley, and 2 itinerant photographers. And again, we don't have any photos attributed to Mrs. Brainerd. And the 1920 census lists Springer, W.A. Pratt of Kelso, and Ellsworth Price of Castle Rock. And we do have a few photos by Price and a few dozen photos by Pratt. But as they are more on the tail end of the time frame I set for this presentation, I decided not to include them. So, in summary, these photographers together represent 866 images in the museum's collection. For the same time period, the museum has another 2,500 images, which are either unattributed or taken by amateurs. Remember that the Kodak Brownie came out around 1903, 1905, and became very popular. So a lot of amateur photographers boomed starting around that time. Any questions?
I would imagine that some of them worked as an apprentice under some photographer before they became photographers.
Well, stands to reason, yeah.
Just one comment, Bill, on the Castle Rock imprints.
Mhm.
I noticed that a couple of them spelled Castle Rock as one word. And if you recall from my presentation, that's how the post office name was spelled from 1895 to 1930. So those
Okay.
imprints probably date from, well, almost certainly date from after 1895.
Yeah, makes perfect
Maybe I'll
sense.
narrow it down.
Makes perfect sense. Any other questions?
What kind of investment at that time would have been required for someone to begin a photography business?
Oh, probably quite a bit. Camera itself, I'm sure, wasn't cheap, and the negatives were all taken on glass plates at that time, and so the fragile glass plates, and of course the developing chemicals as well. So I'm sure it cost a small little bit to get going as a photographer in those days.
Did you happen to find any information on what photographer would charge to get, for example, a family to a portrait?
I think in advertisements I've seen probably like $1 for a portrait, something around there.
Direction to change.
So yeah, yeah.
What kind of equipment did they have? Do you have any examples of that?
We did, but it was a little too big for me to try to wheel in here for the program tonight. We have one in our collection that on a stand stands about that tall. And it's, you know, a big box with a huge lens about this big around. So pretty big.
What year was that? 1880s?
I can't recall exactly which how old that one is, but I guess it's probably around 1900. Yes.
Did you get any ideas on what kind of exposure times they used on some of these? If the plates weren't exactly the most sensitive.
No, they weren't. That's why they usually had to. That's why in most early photographs, nobody's smiling because it was harder to hold a smile for over a minute.
Yeah, we love the one in your lobby there.
Oh, yeah.
There's one lady in there
That's a neat.
the school marm.
Yes. Yeah. Usually they had to hold it for a minute, even 2 minutes to get a good exposure. I mean, we have several photos in our collection of babies and small children where there's at least an arm that's blurred or something is blurred in it because of the long exposure time.
Yeah, because I was surprised that for one of the first pictures of the dams. So You can see the water, it wasn't that blurred.
Yeah, the more light,
So it was a very bright day.
yeah, the more light, the shorter the exposure time. So if it was a bright day, it might have only been 20 or 30 seconds. And so they would have gotten a better photo quicker. Anything else?
We have a question online. How much did the big box camera weigh roughly? The one that's too heavy to bring in?
Oh, I don't know that I've ever tried to hold it to weigh it. It's my guess is it's probably 30 or 40 pounds. At least. That's it. Okay. Joseph, any closing remarks?
I'll let you close it down, Bill.
Okay. Well, I guess that's it. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.